Hello and welcome to this edition of OBG Talks with me, Patrick Cook, Oxford Business Group's Regional Editor for Asia. I'm delighted to be joined today by Niko Safavi, CEO of PT Molex Indonesia, the Indonesian paint manufacturer. Niko, thank you for joining me today.
It's a pleasure to be here with you virtually. A big fan of your organization and the research that you do.
Thank you very much. We're a big fan of yours as well. And we recently collaborated on the production of a COVID-19 response report. And this explored the impact of the pandemic in Indonesia, with a particular focus on the manufacturing and the paint sector, and also any opportunities that may arise from the profound disruption that this pandemic has created. And the report was structured under the OBG 4Rs matrix of resilience, response, recovery, and reinvention. So today what we'll do in this vidcast is we'll just contextualize and explore some of those issues in the report. And the report highlighted the fact that the pandemic created unprecedented disruption in the manufacturing sector, both in terms of disrupting the supply chains and also demand. Can you tell us a bit about how you at PT Molex Indonesia were able to cope with that disruption? And also, what's your expectations for recovery and demand as we head towards the fourth quarter of 2020 and into 2021?
Well, I can tell you that it was not without challenge, and it does not remain without challenge for us and pretty much for everybody in this sector and elsewhere around the world. We sort of faced this in mid-February when I was in Jakarta, and it just looked like things were going to deteriorate rather quickly. I relocated back to the US to be with my family, and I've been trying to manage the business remotely. And certainly remote management and staying in contact with your management team has been one of the challenges that everybody's faced in this climate. So one of the biggest challenges for me personally has been to be able to manage this business remotely. But to touch on the point that you raised about demand and operations, certainly we've seen disruptions in our supply chain. We specifically, the lockdown in Malaysia affected one of our raw materials, and we couldn't produce a particular product for a while. And what we saw very quickly by mid-March is that basically the construction sector had come to a halt. And shortly after that, a research report, I believe it was by Fitch, came across my desk and basically issuing a very grave warning sign about some of the issuers in the market that were apartment builders. So we paid a lot of attention to that. We were very cautious. And so as a result of that, we decided that this is not the year to focus on new construction. This is the year to focus on repaint and consumer and brand building and connecting with the end user as much as possible versus the developers. And that has helped alleviate some of the pressure for us. And I think year over year, we are down into the single-digit percentages, which I very gladly accept up to this point. But it has been challenging. Even maintaining operations itself has been challenging. As you might imagine, we are doing an excessive number of tests on our people, our salespeople in the stores. We've had people get sick. We've had to close a branch. And just yesterday, we decided to close our head office for 3 days because we had a positive patient that was not, or positive employee that was not identified for 24 hours. And we wanted to make sure it's all safe. And all of that eats into your productivity. All of that eats into your momentum as you're trying to basically build a year according to your forecasts and plans.
Yeah, sorry to hear that about the employee, but I'm sure you, as you say, acted very quickly. I'd like to circle back to even before the pandemic. If we look at Indonesia and where it was before this disruption all started, you know, the country was in the process of trying to enact some wide-ranging reforms. The Jokowi administration was focused on its omnibus law reforms to try and, you know, improve the business environment and also attract more foreign investment. Now, if we look at the global economy now, especially the Southeast Asian economy, we see this trend of a lot of manufacturing companies looking to perhaps de-risk concentration of supply chains in China, looking for alternative production bases. How does this fit into Indonesia? Like, how is Indonesia positioned to attract new investments in industry and manufacturing when the dust settles from the pandemic?
Certainly from what I've heard, others in the industry are talking to US buyers, for instance, and a number of European buyers. So I know that there is at least an attempt to take some of the workshop business that is in China and bring it to places like Indonesia and Vietnam to some degree. And we want to make sure that we are ready to respond to that. Now, in our business, paint, it's very difficult to ship a very heavy paint container across the world, but there are businesses in Indonesia that are able to produce consumer goods and finished goods, and they stand to benefit if the trade tension between the US and China becomes very protracted. And from all indications, it seems to be going in that direction. Now, from the perspective of US buyers specifically, where I have a little bit more experience versus European buyers, I have to say that the American buyers have become rather spoiled. China is very efficient, extremely efficient. And I think they still have very robust margins. So it could be a situation where they become an exporter of deflation to the world by being able to absorb costs and tariffs, whatever the adds-on would be on the state side. So winning that business from China is not going to be easy. It's going to require a very aggressive private sector as well as good policies by the government to enable the private sector to respond and take advantage of the opportunity.
And the report also looks at two drivers of growth for the paint market. One is the construction sector, and you've already mentioned a bit about how the construction sector was affected. The other being the household retail market. Can you tell us a bit more about what trends have emerged from the pandemic when it comes to retail in Indonesia?
So historically, to address the construction part, I think it's been about 10 to 11% of GDP. So it's been a very important component of the country's total economic output. But we've seen a lot of things in terms of consumer behavior that are not unexpected. For instance, if you look at consumer behavior since March, grocery spending is up, essentials are up, discretionaries are down. Automotive sales, I want to quote from memory, June were down 93%, I think, year over year, and even still, they're down into the 60% group, I think, range year over year. So big ticket items are not being purchased. Travel, restaurant, entertainment, they're all down. Non-discretionaries are up. Grocery spending has actually boomed. People are spending more time at home. They're taking care of themselves more. And I think there may have been some hoarding at some point at the beginning of the pandemic as well. People were genuinely concerned as Indonesia imports a number of key staples from other countries. It's not a self-sufficient country when it comes to food and being able to meet dietary intakes. And we expect that to continue until such time that there is a real medical healthcare solution to what we're experiencing. So I don't expect that to go away.
And one of the key themes that ran throughout the report, Niko, was the issue of sustainability. And I know this is an issue very close to your heart. You know, Molex Indonesia was the first company in Indonesia to produce carbon neutral paint, and you've won a number of awards and been recognized for your CSR and your sustainability initiatives. Now, from the pandemic, we've seen, at least temporarily, there's been a decrease in CO2 emissions, and there's sparked a lot of debate around whether, from this disruption, there might emerge a more green and sustainable economy. So how do you see it in Indonesia? What are your expectations for Indonesian policymakers and also corporate decision makers when it comes to adopting more sustainable strategies as we look to kickstart the economy and sort of reinvent the economy in many ways from the disruption of what we are now experiencing?
Well, thanks for giving us credit for our hard work to basically take a position in the market as being the sustainable company. We certainly hope that both industry and the government pay a lot more attention to sustainability. We see a complete goal congruence between sustainable revenues and a sustainable behavior towards the environment. One cannot cannibalize the other over long term. You can over short term. And nothing would make us happier to see more companies do what we have done to basically take ownership for their CO2 emissions by either taking action to reduce it, or as we've done, action to reduce as well as purchasing offsets. Going forward, I think consumers are paying a lot more attention to this. We've seen this in studies. We've spoken to college students. It is a matter that is dear to them. They're more aware of this risk than perhaps people in my generation in Indonesia. And it behooves companies to ignore that emerging trend and that concern by the consumers. In fact, other studies show that people want to buy responsible products from responsible companies. And we are trying to position ourselves, and we think we have, and we've won a number of awards and been recognized for it, positioning ourselves in that spot. But it will not be easy, and I'll tell you why. So for instance, the whole business of doing your entire shopping online actually produces a lot more waste, packaging material and et cetera. So CO2 emissions were down globally because factories were operating at reduced capacities, but we don't really know the long-term impact if everybody's going to be shopping with a click on their computer or their phone. That itself has its own cost, and anybody who's done online shopping knows that sometimes you wait until you have 8 or 10 items in your basket before you check out, and you do, but when the items arrive, they arrive in 5 different packages. So all of that has a cost. But I think over long term, everybody will become better at adapting to what is becoming our new normal, and hoping we can strike a balance between what we learn in this pandemic and the efficiencies that we had going into it. And I think that would be the optimal thing. There's a lot of lessons to be learned, and we are learning every day. We're learning by watching other companies. We're watching other markets and other governments. There's a lot to learn, and the big mistake in my view would be to think that you have a clear answer as to how this is going to go forward. That clarity just does not exist right now.
No, but I think, you've shown quite visionary leadership, and I like the idea of, the blue sky thinking that I think you bring to the business and also to the Indonesian business community there. So I think that's a nice forward-looking end notes to finish this recording. Niko, thank you very much for sharing your insights and also for just helping us to expand on some of the issues that are explored in the COVID-19 response report that Oxford Business Group and PT Mobilex Indonesia collaborated on. It's been a pleasure.
Well, thank you, Patrick. As I mentioned, I'm a big fan of your organization and the work that you do. We learn from you, in fact, quite a bit. So thank you for this opportunity to contribute.